Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar. I'm going to let everybody join and then we'll get started shortly. Welcome, welcome, welcome. What a great number of people we have joining. All right. Going to give it 30 more seconds and then we'll get started. Okay. I want us to have as much time as possible for this webinar today. So I'm going to go ahead and get us started as the last few people join. Let me share my screen. And yes, hello, welcome to today's webinar. We're talking about advancing collaboration, transparency, and data sharing across your membership. So really talking today to organizations or people who are bringing lots of different types of stakeholders together to work on collaborative supply chain programs and projects. This webinar is recorded. Everyone who has registered will receive the recording and related materials after the presentation today. So please don't worry about that. We will have a live Q&A at the end. So if you do have questions as we're going through today, feel free to use the Q&A function or the chat, and we'll be happy to answer your questions. And my colleague, Iram, you may see, she's our stakeholder engagement manager at Open Supply Hub, will be answering those questions in the chat for you. So you'll get to meet her throughout the call if you're engaging that way. And I think without further ado, we'll dive into the agenda. So my name is Hannah. I lead stakeholder engagement for Open Supply Hub. I'll talk a little bit about what we do in a moment, but in terms of today, we're going to do a quick sort of presentation and demo, some context setting about why we're here and what our organization does and how we can help you all. And then we'll really get into the meat of the session today with it, which is a panel with some amazing people who work in multi-stakeholder initiatives doing collaborative work. We'll introduce them when we get to the panel portion today. And then, as I mentioned, we'll close with a live Q&A. So as you have questions, please do drop them in the chat. I'll be happy to answer them as well as our panelists. So if there's somebody you want specifically to address your question, please do say so when you ask it. But I'll start with a topic that I think is probably on everyone's mind in the call, which is legislation and the world of due diligence and ESG reporting and all the things that come along with it. And we're really focused on sort of transparency as the cornerstone to collaboration and lots of different types of impact today. And when we think about the world and the landscape of legislation that we're playing in, there are really sort of three core components that transparency can enable. The first is sort of this identification component, being able to know and show the production locations and the organizations you're connected to in your supply chain work. Then there's the piece about being able to do things with that data, connecting it with other data sets, layering it with other pieces of information to start to assess and understand the risks that you or your organization or others you're connected to might be exposed to. And then, of course, the most important part and sort of the why behind all of this is the remediation, the investment, the actual sort of programmatic work to improve conditions in supply chains. And so those three steps are all sort of necessary to be able to get to the piece where you're actually doing the programmatic work and making the interventions that you're looking for. But if we look at a lot of the multi-stakeholder initiatives that we've worked with at Open Supply Hub and sort of have been talking with as we work on transparency and collaborative programming, what we hear is that MSIs really want to bring the collaboration and sort of that last piece, these collaborative programs, but they don't always have the tools or the data to address those first two pieces, nor are they sort of best positioned to do that. So they're sort of in a place where they're like, we want to get to step 3, we want to do these collaborative programs, but we need 1 and 2 to happen first. And so some of the specific things that we hear from multi-stakeholder initiatives are, we want a complete picture of all the production locations touching our membership, or we want our focus to be on our mission as an MSI. We don't want to be sort of a data warehouse. We don't want to do data cleaning or data collection. We wish we could really easily see where our members' supply chains are overlapping to help them figure out sort of where to pilot collaborative programs or investments or interventions. And we want to be able to point our members to best practices and tools that will not only help us as an MSI, but also them individually. So there's sort of this ecosystem of solutions and programs available. And what we believe at Open Supply Hub is that transparency can really be the key to unlocking this if we make a very important shift as sort of an industry, as stakeholders working in supply chains. And that shift is from this world of transparency for transparency's sake to transparency that solves problems. So moving from a place where supply chain data is hard to find, siloed, unstructured and messy, to one where supply chain data is accessible and shared, collaborative and in context, structured and easy to use. If we think about data sharing and transparency in those terms, that's when it starts to unlock these pieces where you can know and show your supply chain, you can easily layer that data with others, and then you can find your collaborators and be able to work on solutions. And so that's what Open Supply Hub is really trying to enable. We're an NGO and a public good, and essentially trying to power the transition to safe and sustainable production by building the world's most complete map of global supply chain locations. And you can almost think of us as a Wikipedia of supply chain data, where any organization connected to production locations around the world can share data about who they're connected to. We standardize that, clean it up, make it really easy to work with, and then open it up in a public good where you can do searches, which I'll show you in a moment, like who is overlapping with my supply chain, or who else is invested in this region that I'm also invested in. And that's where you really get to that collaboration piece of figuring out sort of who you might be able to work with on collaborative programming. And there are really 3 core pillars to our model that enable this, and they line up a bit with some of the steps to meeting due diligence requirements. So the first is creating a reliable, interoperable data set. And this gets into some of the nitty-gritties of supply chain data, but it's actually sort of one of the key pieces that's keeping organizations from being able to collaborate, and why so many MSIs are saying, we don't want to, nor can we be data holders, because the data is so complicated. And that's this issue of data being quite unstructured and messy when it comes to production locations, where not any organization's particular fault, but if 5 different companies are all sourcing from the same supplier, they might all be referring to that supplier in slightly or not so slightly different ways in their databases. And so when they're trying to line up their data sets to see, okay, are we all sourcing from the same place? Are we all working with the same organization? It's actually quite difficult to do so and can lead to a lot of duplicates in data. And so our database is built on a human in the loop machine learning algorithm that is essentially trained to find all of those variations in the names and addresses of production locations and match them together into a single facility profile that shows all of those different aliases and variations in how different organizations are referring to that supplier, but assigns it to sort of a single profile with a universal ID that all of the different stakeholders connected to it can use. And so this is that sort of first piece of getting data into a format that's really easy to use, that's interoperable, that connects nicely with other systems. We then open that up in a public good, opensupplyhub.org, which I'll show you in a moment. And that operates under an open data model. And what happens when you have a nicely standardized data set in an open data platform is that when you're looking at a facility profile or a production location profile on our platform, you can see all of the organizations connected to that location in some way. And so whatever your intervention might be at a specific production location in a particular region across different supply chain actors, you're able to run really powerful searches to see, okay, who are my most likely collaborators at these locations, and then be able to more efficiently sort of make those investments or build those programs. And that's ultimately what we're trying to enable through transparency, is the ability to improve conditions in supply chains. Lots of different types of organizations using our platform. We're very much a multi-stakeholder tool, and value for all of these types of organizations who are both sharing data and making use of it on our platform. So from brands and retailers using it as a disclosure tool, to industrial organizations, civil society, and suppliers and manufacturing groups themselves. And as I said, we'll share this presentation along with the recording after this, so that you can take a look and sort of dive deeper into these use cases. And then just in terms of the number of brands and retailers sharing data, we have over 1,000 organizations who are sharing on our platform. And this is just a snapshot of some of the bigger names that you can expect to see when you're searching Open Supply Hub. But of course, there are many, many more. And so I'll bring this all to life now by going into Open Supply Hub itself and sort of showing you how the tool works, so that as we get into the discussion around transparency and collaboration, you have the idea of sort of what is this tool in your mind as you're working. So I'm going to start by searching for a particular facility that I know the name of. And type that in here. So imagine, okay, I want to run a collaborative program at this facility. I have a great relationship with the supplier. Who else might I want to be working with? And so you type in the name of that facility. We can see the name here. We can see this universal ID that OS Hub has provided. If we scroll down, we can see some very basic information about this production location. So here you can see the work of our algorithm matching all of these different variations in the address of this facility together. Same with the name. So all of these not so different variations, but enough to create duplicates in an Excel spreadsheet. Some very basic data points about the operations happening at this location. And then the real meat of it, all of the organizations connected to this production location in some way. So again, if you're looking for collaborators, you have this sort of ready-made list of organizations who've already raised their hand and said, okay, I'm connected to this production location, and you can reach out to them to work together. So very much a crowdsourced approach to building this profile for this production location. Then, if we want to sort of take that to the next level and say, okay, I want the crowdsourced approach, I want to figure out who I can collaborate with, but I also want to be sure that I'm getting sort of the best quality data that I can from the supplier or the production location themselves. You can see that I've just typed in the name of a production location that is claimed. And so this is where suppliers themselves, or owners or managers of production locations, can come on and say, this is my production location, this is my facility. They go through a short confirmation process, and then they're able to add additional information to their profile. So you can see here, there's a lot more information, and it sort of has this checkbox next to it, and that's coming straight from the source, straight from the production location. So you still have this crowdsourced data set where you have all of the other organizations connected to it, but sort of promoted to the top is the data that came directly from the supplier. So crowdsourced data, but also sort of high quality data as more and more facilities are claimed by their owners. So that's where you're looking specifically at a production location. You know where you want to work, you want to get information about it and sort of who else is connected to it. Then we can zoom out a bit and start to look, okay, let's look at sort of bigger data sets and how they overlap and how companies in particular might be able to collaborate. So I'm going to pull up the Walt Disney Company here and the data they've shared on Open Supply Hub. And they've shared over 9,200 suppliers in their supply chain on our platform. And let's say that they are interested in collaborating with another multi-category retailer, Target. So first I'm going to pull up both of their data sets. And we can see over 13,000 suppliers between the two of them. But we're talking about collaboration. Maybe we're headed into a meeting between our two companies to see if there's work we can do together. So what we really care about are the suppliers that we're both working with. So we're going to check this box. And we'll see that the search results are going to narrow down to just the suppliers that both Walt Disney and Target are working with. And so that's 363 suppliers. And then we can narrow it more. Maybe this is a collaboration that's specifically within the home sector. So these are multi-category retailers. We just want the suppliers that are connected to home goods. And maybe we're particularly interested in suppliers in China for this particular piece of work. And maybe there's a particular region that we care about that we want to draw. So you can see how the results narrow and narrow and narrow until we get down to these 5 facilities, where then we can maybe go into our collaborative meeting together and say, these are the 5 that we want to work with and collaborate around. And you can download the results of any search into a CSV or Excel file to get all of the data that you would see on an individual profile into a machine readable format as well. You can also see, and I'll talk about this a little bit in a moment, different sort of multi-stakeholder efforts and initiatives who are sharing their lists on the platform as well. So Fair Trade Certified, for instance, sharing their list of certified factories and being able to come in and see, okay, who else is connected to the factories that they have certified, and encouraging their sort of members and users to come on and sort of take a look at their list. And you can see Fair is a great search to see different multi-stakeholder initiatives, many others as well, who are sharing their data sets, and we'll talk about some of those in the panel. And then lastly, in terms of the demo, just to share sort of a in context situation and a case study from over a year ago now, which was the earthquakes that happened in Turkey and Syria in February of 2023. And these occurred in an area where there was a large amount of apparel production, others as well, but a lot of apparel production. And so what I am going to pull up here is a pre-drawn map of the region that was most heavily hit by those earthquakes. And you can see sort of a heat mapped drawing of the production locations in that region. And if we think about the use case for this webinar, okay, we're a multi-stakeholder initiative who's trying to help our members navigate this particular crisis and work together on responsible engagement or disengagement, think through what short and long-term relief looks like for this community, whatever the intervention might be. So we have this map, and we're an MSI engaging with Open Supply Hub. One way that some multi-stakeholder initiatives are using Open Supply Hub is sharing an aggregated list of all of their members' suppliers. And so you'll hear from the Partnership for Sustainable Textiles in our panel in a little bit. But if we, within this search, pull up just their data, so we can say, okay, I'm somebody who works at the PST and I want to understand how much my members are affected by this earthquake, I can pull up just my data within this search and see, okay, 90 producers, 90 suppliers within my membership have been affected. And that will very quickly allow me to mobilize the right members and mobilize them together to figure out relief efforts. And again, being able to sort of download the results of that search into a CSV or Excel file. And then for multi-stakeholder initiatives that aren't collecting data on behalf of their members, but rather encouraging their members to share their data so that they can make use of it on Open Supply Hub. And we'll hear from the Ethical Trading Initiative in a little bit. Let's say same use case, but they want to come on and see, okay, individual members, how much are they invested in this region, and who might we want to reach out to support? So they know, okay, one of our members is Asda. So let's see, okay, Asda has 7 suppliers in this area. I know Asda and Tesco work together a lot. This is just a hypothetical example. Let's see how much they're both, okay, 10 suppliers. Are they working with any shared suppliers in this region, so that when I get on a call with them, okay, there's one supplier that both Asda and Tesco are working with in that area. So I just share those as examples of, depending on how you and your members are engaging with the tool in a crisis moment like this, or any other where you're trying to build collaborative programs, it's just very quick and easy to filter and search the data to figure out how different members are overlapping and sort of connected to a particular region. So I'll stop the demo for today, but when we get to the Q&A at the end, if there's anything else anyone wants to see, please do say. And I think hopefully that just illustrates the power of open data, and that open data really opens doors to being able to find allies and build collaborations, to innovate and invest in the places where it really matters, to turn a really complex supply chain into a clearer picture. And to summarize some of the benefits for multi-stakeholder initiatives that have sort of come out so far, of course, the big one is being able to identify collaboration opportunities. So figuring out where your members are overlapping, and being able to really quickly get to the places where it makes the most sense for you to be doing your work. There's also the piece around cleaner and more interoperable data, depending on how your MSI functions and how much data you hold, being able to be sort of a deduplication tool and a universal ID to make it really easy for the data of your membership to play well with your members and any other sort of tools and platforms you might be working with. We, of course, want to be there as a collaborator to help you encourage member transparency, and make it really easy and free for them to be able to share their data to make your work easier. And then lastly, with that sort of claim function that I showed you, helping to reduce this idea of audit and information fatigue, of everybody asking for the same information from the same people over and over again, but encouraging suppliers to just claim their profiles, and then everybody can be working from the same shared base data set about production locations. And in terms of how multi-stakeholder initiatives are using the tool, there's a bit of a spectrum. We'll talk about some of those examples in the panel, and I showed you some of these. But for MSIs who are interested in gathering the data themselves and or have maybe a wider range of tolerance for transparency in their membership, there are multi-stakeholder initiatives who are saying, okay, rather than saying all of our members need to disclose on Open Supply Hub, we would say send your supplier data to us, and we will publish an aggregated list on behalf of our membership of all of our members' suppliers. So it sort of gets you on the path to transparency. That's what we saw with the Partnership for Sustainable Textiles list. Allows them to leverage a lot of the benefits of the platform, but doesn't require each individual member disclosing individually. And then you can move toward individual company disclosure, where maybe your MSI doesn't want to touch the data itself, but wants to be able to sort of mobilize members to work together. And so that might be a situation where you say, okay, all of you, in order to meet our membership requirements or to participate in this program, please share your data directly on Open Supply Hub, and then we'll be using Open Supply Hub as the tool to help our members collaborate. And then for, depending on the use case, we also offer the ability to embed your data into a sort of customized interactive supply chain map on your website. And so if you want to sort of take it to the next level and not just be working in Open Supply Hub, but sort of have that embedded on your website, that's also functionality that we offer. It is one of our premium features, so that of the pieces I've showed you today, that is the only one that costs any money. The rest is completely free for you as an MSI and your members to use. And the last thing that I'll talk about before we dive into our panel is maybe the question that comes into everyone's minds immediately when you start to think about transparency within and across your membership, which is, our members are really nervous about publishing their supplier data, and they have a bunch of questions and reservations, and we'll certainly ask our panelists to speak to this as well. But as an organization who's worked with thousands of other organizations on sharing their data, a few of the big concerns that we hear and sort of how they've been addressed. The first is, if we open up our data, aren't civil society organizations going to come after us? Aren't we going to sort of be put into a position where we're going to have to be defending ourselves a lot? And the first thing that I would say to this mindset itself is just changing a lot because of the nature of the legislative landscape. There's so much more incentive to be collaborating directly with different organizations to fix supply chains, rather than sort of see it as a bad thing to be learning about what the actual conditions are in your supply chain. Outside of that, though, I would say generally what we hear both from organizations, companies sharing their data, and civil society is that the best case scenario is that if there's an issue at a particular production location or in a supply chain, organizations being able to find each other directly and remediate as fast as possible is the best case scenario for everyone. And so sharing data openly allows you to quickly find each other and collaborate directly on solutions instead of doing sort of these bigger public campaigns that are costly for everyone involved and don't always necessarily lead to the results that anyone is looking for. And so it does allow for this more sort of direct and collaborative mindset and approach. And secondly, and maybe more interesting in the world of in the legislative environment we're playing in, if you are sharing where you are working, you don't know what you don't know, right? And so organizations that do have more information about what's happening on the ground can reach out to you and say, hey, we have some information for you that will help you sort of make better assessments and decisions in the future. Or we know of this potential risk that you're facing. Let's talk about it before it actually becomes something that you're going to be held accountable for. And so this sort of proactive outreach piece is one of the really big benefits of sharing your data and sort of reframing this question of, is civil society going to come after us, to I'm going to have way more information about what's happening in my supply chain to allow me to sort of create better conditions within it. The second question we get a lot is, will we lose our competitive advantage by sharing where our production locations are? And I will not sort of speak across the board for every single sector and tier and supply chain, because I know they're not all the same. But generally, there are a few things that are sort of happening here. The first is we are in a very different time than we were sort of 10 or 15 years ago in terms of supply chain data. It is very rarely an actual secret where different sort of brands are sourcing from and who's connected to whom. If there's somebody who wants to find that out, it's very likely they're going to be able to. And so rather thinking about your supply chain data as this super secret thing that you're trying to guard, think about it as sort of being in control of the conversation and sort of where and how and what information is shared. And this is a great way to show, this is the data that we have, this is where we're working, and we are sort of sharing that directly from us instead of that being surfaced by other sources. Another piece and sort of related to this is that more and more companies that we're talking to are saying their competitive advantage is really coming from the quality and type of relationship they have with their suppliers, not just whether or not they are working together. And generally, just in the spirit of meeting this moment of the legislative environment that we're in and the need to improve supply chains, this is just a mindset that we're really seeing shift and seeing more and more stakeholders called to shift. And then lastly, am I violating antitrust or privacy concerns by sharing my data? And you'll have seen on our platform that we very specifically and purposefully only share a small set of data points that are basically deemed phone book data. And this is to address this very specific concern that if we're only sharing sort of what is very surface level and publicly available information about our production location anyway, then we are not in violation of these particular policies or concerns. Obviously, consult your own legal teams, but generally when we've had assessments done of our platform and the work being done there, that is the output. And so in general, I hope that in sort of talking through those different concerns, you can hear that we've sort of reached a point where these historic sort of almost myths or concerns that we've heard about transparency and sharing data have really, really shifted with the times, and that we're in a place now where the benefits of transparency far, far outweigh the risks. And who better to talk to you about that than the panel we have today, who've been working with their members diligently on improving conditions in supply chains and using sort of transparency and collaboration to do that. And so I'm going to now invite our panelists to turn on their videos if they haven't already. And I'm going to have them each introduce themselves as they answer the first question for the sake of time. And so I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing my screen so we can all see each other. And I'm going to start with you, Amelia. And what I'm going to ask all three of you to answer to start is, why is data sharing and/or transparency critical to achieving your organization's mission or vision? And what kind of data are you publishing or encouraging your members to publish now or in the future? So kind of setting the scene for what you're up to at your organization.
Thank you, Hannah. Lovely to be here today. So thank you for inviting me to take part. So for those of you that don't know me, my name is Amelia Cherry, and I'm Senior Progression Advisor at ETI, so the Ethical Trading Initiative. The Ethical Trading Initiative is a leading membership organisation. We're focused on addressing human rights impacts in supply chains, and we support company members to identify and reduce human rights risks in their supply chains. We do that by delivering support, guidance, and collaboration across our membership. Our membership is tripartite, so we have company members, trade union members, and NGOs working together to support workers around the world. So that's ETI in a nutshell. In terms of transparency in ETI, so transparency has been part of ETI's strategy for a long time now. We initially started working on transparency back in 2015, so we've had quite a long run up to today. And for us, the real importance of transparency, being a membership organization, it really comes down to being critical, I think, for effective collaboration. So we support and encourage our members to work together to prevent, mitigate, and remedy issues in their supply chains. But most of the issues that are raised just can't be tackled alone. So for our members to be able to collaborate effectively, it's obviously very crucial that they understand where they're sourcing from, but also who else is sourcing from those locations and who else is working in those regions. So NGOs and trade unions working there as well. So sharing that sort of transparency supply chain data is a really big step towards that effective collaboration. And then secondly, more and more so, I think this is just becoming a big part of effective due diligence as well. So we support our members to follow a due diligence approach in all of the different aspects of the work that we do as an organization. I think for members to be effectively delivering due diligence, they really need to be open about where they're sourcing from. They can then invite further information from other sources. So from whether that's other companies, NGOs, or trade unions, about where they're sourcing from to really get a better picture of what's going on in their supply chains and to make that due diligence, I think, much more effective than it is by doing that solo. And then just to answer your question in terms of the data that we're asking our members to publish now. So for our company members, we introduced our corporate transparency framework about 2 years ago. And this is a public reporting framework. It includes a set of minimum requirements. There are also good and better practice requirements, but the minimum requirements we ask all of our full members to meet. And the type of information that we're asking our members to submit to us includes information on committing to respect labour rights, governance and accountability, identifying and prioritising human rights risks, publishing tier 1 supply chain information, which is most relevant to today, and then also describing how they're enabling trade union rights and reporting on their salient risks and their plans to mitigate those. And then, so that's kind of so far. And then additionally, for this next reporting deadline, which is coming up, we are specifying that our members must be submitting their tier 1 supplier lists through the Open Supply Hub. So that is a new requirement that we are just introducing to our members now.
Thank you so much, Amelia. I'll come back to you with more questions in a little bit, but turning now to Shivdi, same question to you.
Thanks, Hannah, and thanks for the invitation to be on the panel. So my name is Shivdi Singh. I'm the Business Innovation Lead at the Ethical Tea Partnership, and we are a business association. So our members are basically tea packers, traders, and brands of tea. And so to answer the question on why has transparency become critical to our organization's mission, the mission for ETP is to basically create and catalyze systemic change across the tea supply chain with a focus on tea producing regions. And as you can imagine, brands that are based in the UK and Europe need to be able to understand their supply chain to be able to affect this change. So transparency has kind of been baked into achieving the mission by finding it's one particular pathway in order to do this. And we have also recently revised our membership criteria, one of which is a focus on transparency and public disclosure of suppliers lists. And we've been working with members to advance that within their responsible business practices and their kind of appetite to do that. So I think the kind of big why has been for members to understand that in order to address issues in their supply chain, they need to know their supply chain. And in order to do that, they need to have greater sight of doing so.
Amazing. And then last but not least, Linda.
Yes, thank you, Hannah, for the question and also for having us here, having me here. And also thank you for the demonstration. I think it was really amazing. And also few of your conclusion really matched to the experience we have done or made in the PST ourselves. So yeah, my name is Linda, and I'm heading the Textile Partnership, so the PST shortly. And PST is a multi-stakeholder initiative, so it turns 10 this year. So it's kind of, it already has a huge experience, and we embrace different actors group like civil society, businesses, and it's especially relevant, I would say, in the German context. And why is the transparency critical for our mission? So I think from my perspective, or I feel that it's really the DNA and the basis of our work, because it also helps us to implement due diligence and also implement and develop joint projects, as you also mentioned before. We call them partnership initiatives within PST. So these are kind of a form of collective action further down in the supply chain. But I think it also goes beyond, because since the inception of the PST, so we always work towards the vision of a textile and garment industry with 3 defining characteristics. And this embraces respecting the rights of all workers and protection of the environment and the climate, and also in general operating with integrity. And I think we do work the PST contributes in many different ways to make this vision a reality. But the core element, I think, is also that we focus on members taking responsibility over their own supply chain. And as PST, we facilitate the learning between the members, and especially the business members, and also joining the forces in implementation. And for all this, that it's a prerequisite that we have good data of the supply chain available. I think, as I said before, for implementing due diligence processes, but also I think it's also very important to share this information on a public level, for example, via Open Supply Hub. And that's how the data then unfolds its real power. As you also mentioned in your demonstration, so also for making collaboration possible, and also to enable the data for public access. Yeah, and I think we, as a PST, we also took this decision, like the steering committee as the decision-taking committee, that the data transparency till tier 1 is a mandatory requirement. I think maybe we also come a little bit later to this again. And I think this was a very important sign also to be sent, because as a relevant MSI, like as I said, we already have a certain history. We are now at 10 years since our inception. It's important to have this transparency as a signal towards democratization of data, I think, which is also important.
Thank you, Linda. And thank you all 3 for those introductions. I think now we're going to get a bit into the sort of process and implementation side of things. So what does it look like to build these initiatives or programs within your membership? So Amelia, turning to you, you talked a little bit about the evolution of your transparency framework. Can you talk about what the high-level process was to implement that?
Yeah, happy to. So like I mentioned, transparency was in our previous strategy. So we've had a long time to sort of lay the groundwork. And as part of that piece of work, we initially ran a tripartite working group. So a working group with all 3 aspects of our membership. specifically on transparency. And then they after that made a recommendation to ETI on transparency requirements. And part of that was the publication of supply chains. So we had member support and buy-in from the beginning. And then more recently, back in 2021, we developed our ETI member charter, which is essentially a set of commitments for our members to sign up and adhere to. So we developed that with our members, and we decided to embed transparency into that member charter. While we were developing the charter, we undertook a lot of member consultation on developing that and making sure that we got that right. We shared multiple drafts back and forth with our membership. We really listened to our members' concerns and feedback that they had on that. And a lot of that was around that transparency requirement as well. And then finally agreed a final draft with our members, which was signed off by our tripartite board. So following the delivery of the member charter, which had those transparency requirements in it, we developed that out further and built out our corporate transparency framework, which went into a lot more detail about exactly what was going to be needed from members. So once we introduced the corporate transparency framework, we then had about a 1-year lead time for our members to then make the changes before the first submission deadline. And we introduced a longer time frame for our foundation members, and those are members who have been at ETI for 2 years or less. So they're a bit newer to it and they need a little bit more support. And then just, practically, we have an annual submission deadline every year. Our members share the hyperlinks to us, which link to publicly available information. We then assess that information, we share the assessments back with them, and then deliver them with some feedback for improvement for any areas where they haven't quite yet met it.
Amazing. And you talked about sort of member engagement a bit throughout that process. And I can imagine the question on everyone's mind is like, I'm assuming all of your members weren't 100% on board with transparency from the start. So can you talk a little bit more about that process and sort of how you got more and more of your members on board?
Yeah, absolutely. And, of course, we did have concerns raised. And I think particularly the groups that had the most concerns were our SME members, who just don't have quite as much resilience to commercial risk. So there was a little bit more fear from those groups. Some supplier members who were a little bit concerned about being leapfrogged. And then we have certain specific sectors as well that just do have a higher commercial risk due to the types of products that they sell. So that there certainly were concerns that came up. And we did know that we had to have some flexibility in this process to support our members to come on this journey with us. And ETI, the way that we approach these things is always about continuous improvement. So that isn't sort of a change to the way that we work. That's probably always the way that we're going to do things. But ETI has a really broad spectrum of members. So for those of you that don't know us, we cover lots of different sectors. We have apparel and textile, food, farming, fisheries, and general merchandise. But falling under those are many, many different subcategories. We also have a huge array of different sizes of members. So some members with only about £10 million turnover, some all the way to multi-billion. So very broad. And then within that, there are many different levels of maturity. So we knew that we had to take an approach which catered to that diversity of members. And the way that we did that was that we made room for an exceptions process. So members could apply to be exempt from a specific requirement for a 1-year period. And the reasons for that either being exceptionally high commercial risk or contractual obligations. And the way that we manage that is that members can apply for that for a 1 year at a time. So they have to reapply each year. And then during that year, it means that there is still that expectation that they are working towards meeting the requirement. And we support them to do that. So, for example, when members are struggling to publish their supplier lists, some of the ways that we would support them would be to help them to identify either specific products in their supply chain or specific sourcing locations that they feel are less commercially sensitive, so that they can partially publish their supply chain, take that first step, and then keep on improving. And that really gives the members some time to build their understanding about transparency. And I think most crucially, though, just some time to build the confidence that they need to be able to publish their full supply chains. We have examples of members where they have applied for an exception for certain areas of their supply chain, but then in the end either haven't used it or then have published later anyway, all of it. So giving them that support and understanding, I think, enables them to take the time they need to get there along the journey. And I think the other ways we've been able to support members through that journey and getting over those hurdles Firstly, I think by making it a really clear expectation of membership can be really helpful in terms of accountability. And it kind of aligns with upcoming legislation, which is also helpful. But we've also introduced lots of peer-to-peer learning opportunities. So developing case studies from members that have already done this and sharing it with those members, and also creating spaces where they can talk directly to each other to share their stories of how they got there with those members that haven't quite got there yet. And I think by doing that, we've just made it a little bit more achievable and a little bit less scary, and enabled some of those members to be taking those steps forward.
Amazing. Really helpful to have those like very tactical examples of how you did this. Shivdi, kind of same topic for you, the idea of member engagement. I know your board has approved publishing an aggregated list of your member suppliers, and it took you some work to get there. So how did you get your members on board? What was that process like?
Yeah, I mean, some of the key elements that Amelia just talked through are also quite relevant to us as well. So, and just to say, I've been with ETP since 2022. So the kind of journey that I've been a part of has been over just under 2 years, really. And so, yeah, to have landed it at the board in terms of it being one of the minimum requirements for our ETP members to now disclose their supplies lists has been quite a breakthrough, I would say. In 2022, when we started off kind of socializing the topic of transparency, it was such a triggering word that we had to say, know your supply chain. And so I think one of the key elements to being able to get it to the point that it's at now has been a kind of internal capacity building and education process through webinars and discussions across the membership to create the business case for it, but also to kind of, I guess, allay fears and concerns across other members that might not have been as far along in their journey for disclosure. So we had some members that were already publicly disclosing their own supplies list on their own websites. We from before that had one of the requirements was that members would supply us with their supplies list, but that would have been an internal database. And to move from that point to where we are now, we got to the point of agreeing on an aggregated list. So we've taken the first option, which is to have an MSI aggregated list, where members would submit their lists, but that would be then put on an ETP aggregated list. And it's kind of like the halfway point to meeting members where they're at for the ones that are not yet convinced that this is a safe route, and also getting to the point where we can use the leading members and the examples that they already have to advance it. And we're doing that by saying that for the members that are already okay with disclosing, that they can then self-declare, and that'd be a link on our website. So that's live right now on the ETP's website as a kind of midpoint to publicly disclosing. And where we'd like to see us go is to then do that on an open, independent platform. So we've moved along from internal website, company websites to the ETP aggregated list, and then hopefully move towards having an open source platform for that.
Amazing. Thank you. And then Linda, you are a few years into publishing data on OS Hub at the PST. So as you look back on the process and what you and your team have learned, do you have any advice that you would give to other MSIs who are looking at sort of implementing transparency requirements and programs like these within their membership?
Yeah, thank you, Hannah. Yeah, I think we have similar experiences to those of ETI and also the MSI. I think what is really important, or what was really important, is that we have this topic already in our minds for quite some time, and that we have done already a huge and long journey. So I think my first advice would be to give it time, yeah, and to also to find a common ground and to see where you go. So with regard to the PST and our experience, it was that our first workshop on transparency already took place in a members meeting in 2017. And many members showed a huge curiosity about this topic, and the outcome was that 55% of the members voted in favor of a transparency working group within the PST. So I think this was already a very important step which was taken. And then 1 year later, there was a project group initiated, also mandated, to address the topic and to work on requirements. Still, then it took long time because this project group was kind of caught between NGO ambitions and also perspective of publishing as much as possible, and also on the other side, the private sector and business concerns of trade secrets and also the competitive advantages. So at this point of time, the group was not able to reach a common result. But then still, I mentioned it also before, the steering committee decided that there should be an aggregated list for the partnership because it was just a very important message to be sent. And initially, this was voluntary, but it turned mandatory last year. And I think this was also another very important step. And then last year, 62 companies submitted data, and from a total of 8,755 manufacturers. So I think we went to this point, or we got to this point that there were few reservations from the membership, and we see it as a very huge success. So in general, I would recommend to be brave and just try it, as I said, to see where's a common ground and how you can take this topic further. So I also mentioned, I think in general, it takes time and you have to give it time. So I think it makes sense to start off on a voluntary basis and then just give the members also the chance to test the waters. And then at a certain point of time, you can then turn it mandatory. I think it's also important to give the companies a security blanket. So the aggregation and so like publication in an aggregated list also make it possible to have the data transparent, but also without individuals worrying too much about their trade secrets. And I mean, we also have 3 organizational aspects and learnings, which we are really happy to share. I think now it's maybe not the time, but we are happy to answer all the questions also when you just get back to us on an individual level, maybe after the panel discussion and the session we have today here.
Thank you, Linda. And I think it's interesting sort of across all 3 of these stories, and something we've heard is so often these conversations start with like transparency is an absolute no-go, like could not imagine it. And then in the space of a surprisingly short period of time moving toward disclosures like the one we're seeing here. So thank you all for sharing your tips for sort of how you made that happen. Shivdi, turning back to you, I know we're in the early days of implementation at ETP, but could you speak a bit about how going through this process has changed the way your membership and organization sort of approach and see transparency, sort of the impact there?
Yeah, so it is early days for us. We've moved to the point where we have an aggregated list on our website itself. So that's kind of like the halfway point right now in our implementation journey. And so I think, what your question is to answer the ways in which the members have, can you just repeat your question, please?
Yeah, of course. Sort of how has this process changed the way you and your members sort of talk about and see transparency, sort of the quality of that conversation?
Yeah, and as we said, like at the beginning, 2 years ago, transparency was such a triggering word, right? And I think it's both an internal and an external thing. So the external aspect has been the kind of change of EU legislation and the continued kind of raising of the profile of human rights due diligence and what that means. And because transparency is a core part of being able to demonstrate access to information about your supply chain, we realized that members began to understand that this was more of a benefit and not a burden. And we've been trying to push that message more and more now, that members can see that this is something that will benefit them, and being within an association that's kind of fostering that capacity and support around, even for the ones that haven't been able to do this yet on their own. that it seems like it's an enabling space for being able to learn and share and exchange. So parts of that process has also been getting leading members who have been further along in their journey to share their experiences. I think Amelia and both Linda spoke about that. So I think the value of member-to-member learning has been quite key in the process. But it's also been just continuous communication, stakeholder engagement and discussions, and answering questions to get to the point that we're at. And we've recently kind of publicly announced the criteria to our wider membership last week. So we'll be going through a range of stakeholder engagement sessions with, a variety of our members from different categories of our membership to talk through these new requirements and to answer these questions. And I think the more awareness that's built with webinars like this and examples from other MSIs, the greater there will be a kind of increased appetite for being able to continue to publicly disclose. I think that's kind of key, and I think we can see that direction of travel quite clearly.
Amazing. And we'll close out this panel discussion with sort of final two questions for Amelia and Linda around impact and sort of the impact that you've seen. So Amelia, knowing that this specific transparency requirement on OS Hub hasn't gone live yet, but that you've been sort of pushing for transparency for some time, and using data within your membership, can you talk about the sort of impacts and benefits that you've seen for your members?
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, most obviously, I think members have published, more members have published their tier 1 supply chains, which is great. And it's really impressive to see it and to see how, how proud they are of like what is a really big milestone. So that's kind of first and foremost. But I think for us, the transparency framework sort of has a dual approach. So partly it gives our members these great opportunities for due diligence and collaboration, but also as a membership organization, it provides us with really excellent data as well. So we have many more insights into our members' work and their performance. And generally, we found that they're, how transparent they're being, what they're sharing. It's been quite a useful indicator for how well a member is generally performing in their human rights work. And that supports us in our accountability processes. It also gives us better understanding of which members need more support from us and which ones are there to be able to share what they've learned with those other members. So we're just learning a lot more about what our members are actually doing by them putting this information in the public domain. And we've been able to collect some really great case studies to share as well. And we also collect information for internal use, such as our members' salient risks, so understanding what those risks are that they're seeing, and that helps us to direct our collective action work. In terms of sourcing data, though, that's a really big benefit too. So I think at the moment we are manually collecting our members' sourcing country data from their tier 1 supply lists, which is quite an onerous process doing it yourself, I have to say. But from next year, once our members are all publishing on the Open Supply Hub, we'll be able to do that a lot more quickly. But at the moment, it's still really valuable. And in fact, using the Open Supply Hub is still really valuable to us because about a third of our members are already publishing on the Open Supply Hub. So we do use that as a tool for those third. That's the quick third. And then the other 2/3 is a bit slower for us to collect. And the difficulty with doing that manual data trawl as well is that it's we only do that once a year because it's quite time consuming. Whereas on the Open Supply Hub, it'll be updating as often as members are updating the information, which is really helpful. And just visually, it's a little bit easier. But I think one of the other key benefits for us in terms of knowing where our members are sourcing from is in terms of crisis response. And actually, what you demonstrated earlier was almost exactly the kind of information I was going to share today, which is that specifically in crises, and actually in that earthquake that happened, that was the Turkey one actually you were talking about, but in Morocco in September 2023, we used the Open Supply Hub to be able to identify which of our members were sourcing from there. So we were able to map that really quickly in terms of those that are published on the Open Supply Hub, and also get an understanding of the general manufacturing facilities, which is really helpful when we're talking to other MSIs to understand where the impacts are in general, as well as specifically for our members, be able to overlay that against each other. And then, ultimately, we then had a list of which of our members were impacted. We were able to reach out to them, share what our understanding was, what the impacts might be. And for that particular example, the earthquake wasn't in sort of main manufacturing areas, but for our members, but workers still might have been impacted due to travel disruptions or family affected. So it was a really valuable tool in that circumstance, and one that will be more valuable to us this time next year once more of our members are on the Open Supply Hub. So we will be very happy when they're all on there, and it'll be much quicker for us to do that sort of crisis response work too.
Thank you so much. And apologies to everyone for running over a little bit. There's never enough time on these things. But Linda, I would like to ask you one last question, sort of this impact side of things. A few years in, how has the PST been leveraging the data on OS Hub? And are there any sort of impact stories that you can share about how it's benefited you and your members?
Yeah, thank you, Hannah. Yeah, so I think PST has constantly working and also expanding its use of the Open Supply Hub for our social and environmental objectives. And I think we use it for different purposes. And it's a little bit similar to what you also said in your, or like demonstrated in your presentation. So first of all, it's for internal planning and collaboration. So it means that if we create new initiatives, so we also try to see where our members and their suppliers are located, and maybe which are best placed to contribute towards individual product objectives. So we try to integrate the members and their suppliers within the development of new initiatives. And that's where for what we use the data also of the Open Supply Hub. Same goes actually for the external planning and also collaboration. So it's nothing we do on a like huge scale, but we do it from time to time, that if we have existing projects and initiatives and we would like to get like more members and their suppliers on board, for scaling up the projects, we see where their suppliers are located and if it fits to our projects. Same also with regard to MSIs, and if there are overlapping suppliers in like overlapping regions. And we also use it for internal communication of risks. So that means that that if we come across of incidents like via media or like from other MSIs as well, so we inform our members, also checking the supply chain data on Open Supply Hub, and inform them about the risks they might cross.
Perfect. Thank you so much. And I can see that Iram has been sort of diligently answering questions that have come in through the Q&A. For the sake of time, I might answer one or two live, but knowing that we're over time, feel free to drop off and get the recording. But I think I saw a few questions come in about sort of supplier consent with Open Supply Hub in particular. Do they have to sort of agree to be listed? Does this violate GDPR? And this gets back to the piece that I was talking about around sort of phone book level data. And so when a facility isn't claimed, when sort of others have shared that data on Open Supply Hub, that data is so basic and sort of phone book level in terms of the general operating information about it that it is not deemed to be in violation of GDPR. Once they claim their facility, they might be adding information like contact information and things that could sort of move into that realm. But in that situation, the supplier has added their information directly themselves. So they have sort of given consent directly for that information to be on the platform because they have given it. And so that's generally how that works. And if a supplier ever wants to be unlisted, doesn't want to be on the platform, they're welcome to reach out and say, like, I don't want to be on the platform. I will say in our 5 years of existence, that has yet to happen. So there you go. And then let's see. Some questions around sort of data moderation and sort of how our platform works as we're getting different data sets from different users. And there are certainly discrepancies and inconsistencies in different databases. That is very much the idea behind our model. And so basically the way it works is as different data sets come into the platform, they hit both humans and our algorithm who are sort of cleaning and matching that data. And so our algorithm is sort of checking the data that comes in against all of the different entries that are already in Open Supply Hub to check for matches and has sort of various inputs that it uses for that. And then we also have a human data moderation team who's sort of checking that work in more ambiguous situations. On top of that, because we are an open data platform and sort of are a data commons, if you think about it that way, you can give us feedback, and we sort of thrive on being this sort of living, breathing platform where the data is constantly getting better and better. And so if you see something on the platform, maybe you see a duplicate entry, maybe you think that there's sort of a better set of GPS coordinates, whatever it might be, there's a flag on every facility profile to say, this is a duplicate, this facility is closed, I want to report an edit, and our data moderation team then reviews all of those reports that comes in. So the idea is that it is very much this communal crowdsourced approach to create the highest quality data set possible. And we are well over time now, so I'm going to close it out there. Thank you so much to our panel for joining. Really, really incredible insights, and so helpful to hear sort of tips and stories from behind the scenes. Thank you all so much for joining and for your great questions. Thank you to Iram for answering them in the Q&A. As I said, we'll be sharing the recording and the presentation materials with all registrants soon. And have a wonderful day and a wonderful rest of your week. Bye-bye.